Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking the movie Ant-Man. I went and saw it Friday just after it came out. Was lucky I got off work early, so I ran over there. And at the end of the day, this is a good movie. This was a lot of fun. Charlie over at Emergency Awesome, he had this really nice observation about the movie that I completely agree with. And he said that this is a Marvel movie that feels like a normal movie. And what he meant by that is the Marvel movies, and don't get me wrong, I've seen them all. I love them all. Well, mostly. Wasn't too thrilled with Thor: The Dark World, but I don't think anybody was. But anyway, is that the Marvel movies are very big on spectacle. They're very big on that roller coaster ride, and that's part of the reason that we love them. And the Marvel movies also tend to have a lot of very nice character moments and all that stuff. But it always really does seem to be that they place that extremely high priority on the spectacle. And then, these are comic book movies, so of course, the spectacle is a big reason why we come to see them. Ant-Man, however, really feels like a much more down-to-earth story. It kind of feels like if you change things up a little bit, this could have been a movie that had nothing to do with Marvel. Sort of reduce the superhero aspects to it and just sort of turn the Ant-Man technology into any potentially destructive technology or whatever. And this could have been just a really fairly normal, you know, action comedy movie with a little science fiction element to it. And that's not to say that it's a bad thing. It really does sort of let it feel like this movie has room to breathe. It really has room to focus in more on the characters. And that's something that it does pretty darn well. Paul Rudd, of course, is the guy that plays Scott Lang, and he's not somebody I was actually super familiar with, but I know people have. There are people out there who are just absolutely enormous Paul Rudd fans. Before this, I think the only thing I can really recall seeing him in was when he guest starred. I guess it must have been like 7, 8 years ago on Veronica Mars. And people online were like freaking out, like, "Oh my God, it's Paul Rudd!" I'm like, "Who the hell is Paul Rudd?" Well, now I know for sure who Paul Rudd is, and he's a very good actor. This guy has great comic timing. He really knows how to play up some heart. I mean, he's an absolutely excellent addition to the just staggering roster of well-known established actors, and of course the newcomers that Marvel has managed to get under their flag. And Scott goes on a pretty simple journey. He's always portrayed as someone who's good, but is willing to kind of go out there and do what is necessary, even if it's maybe not the smartest thing in the world. And that it kind of really plays into the theme of all of this. That that everyone deserves a second chance. He tried to go out there and do something good, but he did it in basically the worst way possible by committing well, as he repeatedly states, burglary. By the way, there are going to be some mild spoilers in this review, just so you know. And that's what gets him tossed in jail for those 3 years. Now, in all fairness, they do say that he did honestly try and work as a whistleblower. He's a guy who tried. He tried doing things within the system, and it didn't work, and that's what kind of pushed him into kind of going the criminal route. Well, here he's once again sort of going against the system. I mean, he is, as is stated, breaking into a place to steal some shit. But again, he's doing this for the right reasons this time. He well, not that I mean, yes, helping people who are getting screwed out of money is good, but it's I wouldn't really say that's sort of the thing that's worth going to prison for. But here he's honestly trying to stop something that is a genuine threat to people all over the world. One thing that I like this movie does is it really, really plays up just how incredible a power shrinking is. The idea that there could be hundreds of those yellow jacket suits out there in the hands of God knows who, or even worse, in the hands of Hydra. I mean, that's pretty damn scary stuff. And through it all, we do see that Scott is a good person. He's a person who is good at heart, but is willing to cross that line. We see that in the scenes with his ex-wife. Yes, she's obviously not happy with him for showing up at the birthday party, but she understands he's doing it out of love. I mean, even the stepdad of his daughter, Cassie, sees that Scott isn't a terrible person, but he's a person that, in a lot of ways, you can make a good case that he's not a good influence. I mean, he's a guy who just got out of prison, and within a pretty short amount of time, does indeed go back to crime. So you can understand why he wouldn't want Scott around. But Scott is cares about his daughter. He cares about his friends. And he learns over time to care about Hank Pym and Hope too. And he is willing to make those sacrifices, as we see when he shrinks down to the microscopic level, in order to do what's right and to help make the world a better place. And at the end of the day, that's what really kind of qualifies him as a hero, that he is willing to sacrifice himself, to put himself on the line for other people. And that kind of brings us to Hank Pym, somebody who spent years doing the same thing. And at the cost of everything. It cost him his wife. It cost him the relationship with his daughter. And it cost him his involvement with S.H.I.E.L.D. And, it was really pretty cool to see older Peggy Carter and Howard Stark there at the very beginning. Of course, we also see the jerky guy who was later revealed to be part of Hydra, which really reinforces that, yeah, this whole Hydra thing was right there from the very beginning. And if you stop and actually think about the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that scene happened in 1989, and Howard Stark was assassinated by Hydra 2 years later. So, yeah. But anyway, it does. I do like that they kind of go into that. He talks about how, like, no, I'm not going to let my technology be used by it like this, and it really does. That scene there at the very beginning makes perfect sense. Why he's not going to go and, as Scott suggests, like, hey, why don't you just get the Avengers to deal with? It's like, well, yeah, Howard Stark was trying to steal my work and turn it into a weapon. Obviously, I'm not going to trust his son. Now, yeah, Tony has redeemed himself, but keep in mind, what did Tony do for a lot of his life? I.e., he made weapons for the military. And who's he hanging out with? Captain America. S.H.I.E.L.D., Captain America, Black Widow, people heavily involved with S.H.I.E.L.D. Bruce Banner, another guy who turned into a monster trying to recreate the super soldier serum. Again, trying to take science and use it for military purposes. And of course, Hawkeye, also a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Falcon, also ex-military. Scarlet Witch, yeah, kind of one of the people who helped almost destroy the world. Never mind that the Avengers, again, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, almost destroyed the world because they dicked around with a bunch of software they didn't understand. So it makes perfect freaking sense that Hank Pym is like, the Avengers, man, F those guys. I wouldn't trust those guys as far as I can throw them. Now, of course, Ant-Man is one of the earliest Avengers, and if I remember correctly, he's even one of the founders. So this is a really radical departure for Hank Pym. But it's I think it's a very solid interpretation. And I mean, for God's sakes, it's Michael Douglas. I mean, this guy is huge. I mean, he's an amazing, amazing dramatic actor. And really not the sort of guy you would expect to turn up in the Marvel movies. But, I mean, he's even said that one of the reasons he did this is because he's got kids who are, in their early teens. And, they're really not cut out for those R-rated movies that he tends to do. But Ant-Man is, something that, families can enjoy together. So he's like, yeah, cool. I did this because, something I could watch with my kids. And, they're at the age where they're starting to really get just how big a deal my work is, but they're not ready for the R-rated stuff. This they're cool with. And I guess I should kind of point out that I am sure there's people I haven't seen it myself because I've got other things. I've had other things I've been doing this weekend. But this is the internet, so you have to know that there's somebody out there getting bent out of shape about the whole Hank Pym in the comics having hit his wife. And yes, That totally did happen. Now, if I remember correctly, he was actually in the midst of going going crazy because he was exposed to the weird side of Pym particles, which they do mention here in the movie. It's really heavily implied that Darren Cross was kind of a jerk, but exposure to the Pym particles just basically turned him into a murderous psychopath. But anyway, going back to the comics, yeah, that totally happened. And again, I don't really remember the details, but I am fairly sure that there was at least a partially medical explanation as to why Hank was so messed up in the head that he would hit his wife. But the thing about that is, it's a classic example of how people, even fictional characters, can often be defined by the one worst thing they've ever done in their life. Now, what people, and generally, if people are familiar with Hank Pym to any degree, and they're not comic book fans, that's what they know him as, is like the guy, the superhero who hit his wife. And what people don't seem to realize is, though, that the guilt of that actually eventually drove Hank to have a nervous breakdown and basically assume the identity of Yellow Jacket, acting as if he was a completely different person, and then the Wasp married him while he was in that identity. I mean, let me reiterate that the Wasp actually married a guy who was in the midst of a psychotic breakdown that he basically formed an entirely different persona for himself. And well, I mean she's even acknowledged yeah, that was a pretty shitty thing of me to do. And I guess what I'm saying here is that, I mean, there is obviously no justification for hitting someone, domestic violence. I mean, come on, there's no defendable justification for that sort of thing. I'm just saying that, yeah, if you're if somebody's literally having a medical issue that is causing them to basically have a mental breakdown, maybe we need to cut them just a little bit of slack. People do have mental issues that causes them to do things that they would not normally do if they were in complete control of their faculties. Now, again, it's not saying it's not wrong. I'm just saying, hey, there's more to it than that. Now, people who hurt other people when they are in complete control of their faculties, okay, that is obviously completely inexcusable. But I just really don't think it's fair to Hank Pym as a character to completely and utterly define him by that. As I said, he got so driven, the guilt of having done that, even though he wasn't even in complete control of himself at the time, caused him to have a psychotic breakdown. And then that just kind of goes on to ignore everything else that he's ever done in his life that was worthy, everything that he's ever tried to do to redeem himself. I mean, people do terrible things in their life, but as we see in this movie, everyone deserves a second chance. So, yeah, obviously hitting your wife or husband or kids or whatever is not cool in any way, shape, or form. But, if someone does something really long in life and they spend genuinely work hard to try and redeem themselves, is it really fair to them to only define them by the one bad thing that they did and not everything else they've done in their life? I mean, stop and pause for a moment and think about the worst thing you've ever done in your life. The worst thing. And how would you feel if that was all, whenever anybody talked about you, that was all they ever talked about? That would be pretty shit, I would think. So, and I like how I don't really think that, I think I'm going around in circles. I think I've made my point. And for the record, in the comics, Hank's wife totally forgave him for what happened a long time ago. So what I'm saying here is, again, just to reiterate, yeah, that whole hitting his wife thing happened, and certainly terrible. But there's more to that whole situation than a lot of people know. And one, if you're going to offer up criticism about that, then I think it's only fair that you understand the full story. And two, if you're going to do that, then I think it's only fair that you look at both Hank and Janet Pym, as complete characters. Don't just look at that moment, okay? Now, of course, make whatever judgment you feel is appropriate, but do it with the whole story, the whole characters in mind. Don't just look at that one, very famous picture panel from that old comic book where Hank smacks Janet and go like, okay, Hank Pym is a horrible, horrible human being. F him. I mean, seriously, how in the name of God do you expect anyone to take you seriously as a critic if that's all you're going to do? If you're going to look at one panel in a comic book from God knows when, like the 60s or 70s or something, and use only that to make a judgment about a character, do you see how absolutely and utterly that means that you have no credibility? Well, I'm probably going to get an enormous amount of hate mail from that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not a popular YouTuber at all, so that's probably not going to happen. And yeah, that's one of the nice things about not being a popular YouTuber, is that I can stand around here and lecture my audience about their moral failings and not really catch a lot of shit for it. Thank you for not liking me, YouTube. I assure you it's only coffee in this. No alcohol. It's not even 8 o'clock in the morning as I'm doing this. But anyway, so let's kind of move along from that and talk about Hope Van Dyne. Now, a lot of people, when they said that she was going to be in this movie, really freaked out because they're like, well, hey, where's Janet Van Dyne? Well, Janet Van Dyne is does pop up in the movie a little bit, but she's mostly seen in like a picture or just briefly in a flashback, and I think this is because they're like, okay, we'll figure out if we decide to bring her in a future Ant-Man movie, we can. It's not going to be a big deal for us to get whatever actress we want. We're not going to be locked into anybody just yet. So nothing really particular to say about Janet Van Dyne herself, but Hope Van Dyne in the comics, she's actually Hank and Janet's daughter from an alternate future from the MC2 universe, where she was actually a villain called the Red Queen. And that version of that character, I'm simply not familiar with. I sort of lost interest in the MC2 Marvel universe, years ago, just because the artwork I thought wasn't all that great. But anyway, here she's obviously kind of intended to be a sort of the stand-in for the Wasp that we all know. And that scene towards the end in The Stinger where her dad shows her like, hey, here's this suit that you were working on for your mom. I mean, they're obviously setting her up to be the Wasp in future movies. And yeah, Evangeline Lilly, really, really great choice for this. Very good actress. I honestly, I really felt bad for her when I was watching those Hobbit movies, because it's like, seriously, I mean, this lady's really cool. She's a really good actress, and at the end of the day, that's all she is. She's the love interest who, sometimes shoots some orcs with a bow, and her choices are Legolas and this dumbass little dwarf. It's just like, seriously, I honestly felt bad for her because I'd even read that she's like, when she signed on to be in those movies, like she was like, oh great, I kind of get to do a movie where I don't have to play the love interest, and then the middle of it all looking like, yeah, about that. No, yeah, she just kind of end up the love interest at the very end, but it's such a little thing that I kind of think that's probably forgivable. But anyway, I really do like the way that they sort of play this relationship with her father. She's working with him out of necessity, and is really not a fan of his. Extremely bitter with him, and it's hard to blame her. I mean, Hank Pym has spent her basically the time since she was 8 years old lying to her about what happened to her mother. It's really implied that she even flat out says, like, just after her mother died and she was all really upset, he basically shipped her off to boarding school. And you really have to wonder, well, why didn't Hank come clean with her eventually? And well, Scott makes a really good point of it all. It's because if he'd done that, then she would have absolutely, utterly insisted on being the one to wear the Ant-Man suit and go in there and take care of all of this. And Hank just did not want to put Hope at risk for that. That's why they brought in Scott. I mean, Scott even flat out says, "Your dad brought me in because I'm expendable and you're not." And that's true. We do see that Hank doesn't have a hugely high opinion of Scott. He sees that Scott has potential, but Scott as a person does not impress him. Now that changes over the course of the movie, but still, he's perfectly fine with sacrificing Scott if it's necessary. But he will not sacrifice his own daughter. And having his daughter around and having her kind of hate him is better than, well, having her love him and not have her be gone, have her suffer the same fate as her mother. But it is a really nice dynamic. She's very bitter towards her dad. She's very contemptuous towards Scott. And the real crux of the movie is sort of these three people really building those relationships, rebuilding the relationship between Hank and his daughter, actually getting to the point where Scott has Hank's trust. And ditto with Hope, having her realize, like, hey, like, he's actually an okay guy. So let's see. Nothing really huge to say about Darren Cross as a villain. He's a very minor character from the comics, and his thing was just typical, like, okay, let's bring in an actor and have him ham it up, and blah 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 blah. Again, nothing really huge to say about the daughter, or Paxton, girl's stepmom, stepdad. Although I did love how, if you pay really close attention to the credits, you find out that the voice of that ugly ass rabbit doll that Cassie gets was actually Tom Kenny, aka SpongeBob SquarePants. And just for the record, in the comics, Scott's daughter actually does end up becoming a superhero as well. She gains the ability to increase her size and takes the name Stature. Became a member of the Young Avengers. And let's see. What else do we have? Was this that guy? Michael Pena as Luis. Yeah, he was really great. I mean, he really just absolutely owned the comedy in this movie. And I'm sure there are probably somebody out there who are upset. It's like, oh yeah, the only black and Hispanic character. Well, no, there was the black cop, but he was pretty minor. But yeah, like, oh man, the only Hispanic, really real Hispanic character and the only real black character, they're criminals. Come on here. Okay, yeah, those guys are criminals, but one, keep in mind, half of this gang are Caucasian people. And for whatever their problems, Luis and I forget the other guy's name, John or something. Yeah, they are guys who are criminals, but as it even says in the movie, that here in this circumstance, these are good guys. They are on the side of right. They are helping to prevent something terrible from happening. And look at Luis, who's the most fleshed out of the three. Yeah, he's a guy who's a thief, but he's extremely loyal to his friends. He demonstrates compassion when he goes back for that guard that he knocked out to make sure the guy doesn't just die in the explosion. He shows generosity to his friends. He's like he shows up there. He's right there the minute Scott gets out of prison. He lets Scott crash on his couch. And again, he's willing to he and the other thieves are totally willing to put themselves on the line to help Scott out in this situation. So again, in a way, it's a little bit of a second chance for those guys too. The chance to go out there and put these skills that they have and do something genuinely good in the world. So really, I mean, they're also heroes in this movie. They're supporting characters, but again, reducing them down to just that level, I think, is kind of a disservice. And okay, I'd really be remiss if I didn't mention the big shocker of this movie is the Ant-Man fighting the Falcon. And oh man, I just absolutely did not see that coming, and that was cool as hell. I mean, it totally was there just to sort of like not have people rolling their eyes when they say like Ant-Man's going to join the Avengers. Yeah, right. I mean, Scott takes on an Avenger and wins. I mean, damn. And the Falcon no less. I mean, Sam Wilson is no slouch. So, and of course, that's a really nice entry and of to some of the other nice little Easter eggs they got there. Falcon talks to the journalist lady who's apparently played by some famous YouTuber I've never heard of. And she talks about, like, oh, yeah, we got guys who can jump and crawl and swing, and obviously sort of referencing that, yes, Spider Man has made his appearance already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We just haven't seen him yet. They're saving that for Captain America Civil War. And then, of course, we get the second stinger with Steve Rogers and Bucky, and it's just like, I literally went like, oh hell. I mean, it's definitely a way to get you pumped for Captain America Civil War. So I've been rambling for the better part of half an hour, so I'm going to wrap it up here. At the end of the day, this is a really good movie. It's a lot of fun. It's got some good character stuff, got a lot of really great actors, and it sort of tones things down a little. It still keeps all the things that we like about the Marvel movies, but makes it much more a story about characters rather than about spectacle. So, with that said, guys, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.